We're just going to quick talk about the C# language just to give you a little context and some background before you start working on some exercises. C# is an object-oriented programming language, and it runs on the .NET framework. And it's used for desktop apps and mobile apps and games and full stack web apps. And we have quite a few courses that cover some of those advanced topics in C#. The course that you guys are in, this is our entry-level course. So you're going to be learning the foundations of programming in this class. And everything that you're going to be learning in this class, you are going to be using in more advanced classes down the road. So when you use any kind of coding language, there's typically an environment that you are coding in, and it's called an integrated development environment, or an IDE. Visual Studio Community, which is what we're going to be using, is an IDE. Other popular ones would be Eclipse, and VS Code would also be an IDE. We use VS Code for web pages, JavaScript, and that kind of thing. We use Visual Studio for more of our C# oriented coding activities. As far as languages go, all programming languages have rules that you have to follow. Those rules are called syntax. And if you don't follow the rules, you get errors. And so I've listed some of the rules that you need to remember when you are coding in C#. So it is case sensitive, and that means that upper and lowercase are different. And so, if you don't pay attention to how you name things, you are going to have lots of errors in C#. So being very purposeful when you code and paying attention is really important. All of your commands end in a semicolon, and that is easy to forget when you're starting out. Any kind of text phrase is called a string, and it is enclosed in double quotes. And so let me give you some examples. I'll just type this over here in Notepad. So when I say it's case sensitive, that means that if I was going to say first name, okay, if I was going to have a variable called first name, if I key it in like this, okay, all lowercase, then that's what C# thinks it is. But then later on, if I go to use it and I key in something like this with a capital N for name, C# is going to get confused because they are not the same. Okay, we've got the capital letter here, and it is different than the lowercase. Okay, so you're going to get an error. If you forget a semicolon at the end of a statement, you're going to get an error. If you have, let's say, a variable that's a string, okay, you have to tell it it's a string, put it in double quotes. That is how C# recognizes strings. Okay, and very common for people to forget the double quotes, or they key in one and they forget the other one. You need the opening and the closing for a string. Okay, and here's an example of writing to the console with a string. And you'll notice we do have the semicolon at the end. It's a good idea when you're doing any kind of complicated code to put comments into your code because they actually help other people. Usually when you're writing programs, there are other people that are going to have to come in and maintain them. And so putting comments in your code is helpful for people that have to work with the program when you're done writing it. So there's a couple different ways that you can do comments. A single line comment is just 2 slashes and whatever text you want for your comment. And that can go above the code or next to the code. Okay. But the minute the compiler sees those 2 slashes, it knows that a comment follows. If you're going to have multiple line comment, then you're going to open the comment with a slash and an asterisk. And then you'll key in the multi-line comment. And then to end it, you put in an asterisk and a slash. And so here's an example of a multi-line comment. In C#, the main method is required, and that is where the program starts running. So when you run the program, it's going to compile your program, it's going to link the program, and then it's going to look for that main method to start running the program. And it is typical inside any method, really, to have your code indented. And programs like Visual Studio will do that automatically for you. And there is a way, if the indenting does get kind of messed up, there is a way in Visual Studio to fix it. You can actually highlight your code. And then I believe it's under the edit menu where you can tell it to format all the highlighted code. But it makes the code a lot easier to read and follow if it is indented. Now, C# is not as picky as some other languages. Like Python is super picky about indentation, and you actually get compile errors if you don't indent correctly. C# is not like that. Okay. So the reason we indent is for readability. Command is basically anything that you're ending with a semicolon. Okay, so you'll notice here I've got 3 lines that end with the semicolon. I've got 3 commands. And variables. So you'll notice that I've got in this sample, I have something called integer followed by Fahrenheit, integer Celsius. Integer is a data type, and C# is a strongly typed language. So you do have to tell it what kind of data you're going to store. And an integer is a whole number. The variable name, Fahrenheit, is basically a placeholder in memory where we are going to put a value. Okay, and in this case, we're assigning it 80. So in that spot in memory where Fahrenheit resides, we have the value 80. Then for Celsius in that spot in memory, we've got the result of this calculation being stored. So anytime you want to store data in a program, you have to declare a variable. And that is what reserves the spot in memory. You can declare variables anywhere in the program that you want. And in object-oriented programs, it's a convention to declare them right before they're used. So the syntax is the data type, a space, and the name of the variable. Okay, and int is a data type for whole numbers. Double is for real numbers. So those would be your numbers with decimal places. Character is for a single letter or a single number. And characters have single quotes around them. String we already looked at. And so that's for words, 1 or more words. And they have double quotes around them. And then another data type that we're going to use is called bool. And bool has 2 values, true or false. Okay, and there's no quotes around that. Okay, so if we have a bool variable, we just key in the word true or false as is. Okay, so I do have a couple examples here of declaring some variables. And for now, we're just going to keep it pretty simple with our variables. You do need to remember that they are case sensitive. And in general, we are going to be using all lowercase letters. If you have a multi-word variable, then we're going to use what's called camel case. So if we're going to, you can't have a space in a variable name. So if we have first name, we'll just capitalize the N in name. Okay. If we have phone number, okay, and so that would probably be a string, we'll capitalize the N in number. Okay, that is camel case. So some naming rules. You can use characters, digits, or underscores. Variable names have to begin with a letter, and you cannot have white space. So that is why if you have a multi-word name, okay, you can't do it with the space. Okay, so that's why we do the camel case, because it makes it easy to see what that second word is. You cannot use reserved words. Reserved words are the words that have meaning in the language. So anything that is part of a C# command, we cannot use as a variable name, right? Main, there's a main method, so we wouldn't have a variable called main. So, I mean, some of it makes pretty good sense. So you just have to think about the different commands in the language and don't name your variables the same as the commands. As far as how long a variable name can be, there are no limits. So I tend not to go super long with variable names just because you got to type all that in. And even though Visual Studio is pretty good about filling in text for you, and you'll see that when you start using it, I still try to avoid things that are too long, just because it just is a lot to type. So declaring a variable reserves the space in memory, but it does not put a value in there. So if we have int age and we have double salary, these have all been declared, but there are no values being stored. To store a value, we have to have an assignment statement. And the assignment statement basically has an equal sign. And then you are putting something in the variable. So now you are putting something into memory. Okay, and you can assign a value when you declare it. Okay, so I could put something in first name right now. Okay, or I can put a value in after I declare it. So I have phone number declared, so I could just do phone number equals. Okay, this is totally made up, as you can see. Okay, so I can assign the value after it's declared or when it's declared. If I assign a value when I'm declaring it, I am initializing it. Okay, otherwise I'm just assigning the value. Okay, and so there are some examples here of that. And as far as outputting values, we are going to be using console.writeLine. And what that does is it writes the text and then it does a carriage return. Now there is another variation of this called console.write. Console.write basically will do the same thing without the carriage return. So if I wanted to do console.write, okay, what that would do is it would put out the text, but it would not return the carriage to the next line. Okay, so write or write line, your use of those just depends on whether you want the carriage to be returned or not. Okay, and anytime you are going to write variables and text, at least for right now, you're going to be using the concatenator in between to get those out on your console. Okay, so hopefully this gives you a little foundation moving forward and doing your first interactive set of programs.